So, okay. Hello everybody, thank you for taking the time today to come to my presentation on going. My name is Nicholas Scarsdale, for those of you who don't know me. I'm 15 years old. I'm a freshman here at IACS, and by the end of this year I will have been here for 4 years, which is more than a quarter of my lifetime, which I think is pretty neat. So for this year, I had 3 ILP goals. They were to do 3 or more honors classes every semester, to become a better group worker, and to balance my athletic and academic goals. So, in terms of honors classes, I've taken 4 honors classes the first semester, I'm taking 5 this semester. With that. In terms of being a better group worker, last year, working in a group with me went something like this. We got our groups, I'd say, okay, all of you, I don't want to hear your ideas, shut up and do what I say. Which didn't really work out too well, because I would squash the creativity of my classmates because they often had better ideas than I did, that I just said, okay, I don't want to hear it. And also it hurt my community membership rate. So this year I've been trying to avoid that. I think I have. I've been getting much better grades on group projects, and people haven't been saying, stop doing that, you jerk. So I've done much better. Some of my interests, besides academics, are arguing about politics and religion, running track, studying science, especially physics, which is a field I'd be very interested in going to later on in life. I also enjoy reading and listening to music. So, my learning focus for this year was on projects that taught me skills rather than just material. So not just apartheid lasted from 1948 to 1994, but skills like not procrastinating, not over-underachieving. And that's a term coined in my latest POL by Mr. Frank House and I to describe somebody who does the minimum possible to get A's and nothing else. And that's what I've had a problem with throughout my life. And it's a problem because it's a very important skill to not just say, okay, I have good grades and that's all that matters, but to really try to get learning from school, because that's really what's important. Because if you go on to college and you say, yeah, I had straight A's, and they say, okay, well, what did you learn? To get straight A's? That's not a useful skill. And later, when I get a job, I won't be able to say, yeah, I had straight A's in high school, hire me. Oh, sorry, man. It's really some skills that I need to learn throughout life. And I figure that stopping my procrastination habit, stopping my over-underachieving habit is very useful to do freshman year and get it out of the way and have better things to do next year. So procrastination I found is especially harmful throughout my doing projects, my entire middle school and this high school year, because even though I can generally start a paper at 7 the night before it's due and hand it in and generally get a B, maybe a C, and revise it, it's terrible because as I said earlier, I'm only going in it for the grades. I'm just saying, okay, I got a great grade, that's all that matters. My average is still an A, so I don't need to do anything else. Rather than saying, taking the maximum investment from my work. And so the pieces I'm going to show you are going to demonstrate, in my opinion, how well I've shown growth in these areas. So, the pieces. The first project I'll be showing you are a couple of pages from my Phillips Exeter notebook, which is a project that we worked on in math. It is actually a curriculum that we took from a private school, a very prestigious private school, Phillips Exeter Academy. The project itself is a packet of word problems that teaches you by solving the problems rather than just writing down the notes. So rather than writing down the Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, you solve a bunch of problems on the worksheet and you realize, I just derived the Pythagorean theorem. That's so cool. And it gives you a much deeper understanding of how the theorem actually works. And it also does that with the other things that are in the packet. So we would work on the problems at home, and we'd come into school and we'd present them to everyone else. So on the board, to our classmates, if there were particularly challenging problems, we would all work together to solve them and get a general understanding. So in terms of material, I learned pretty much the entire second half of the accelerated geometry curriculum. That's what the packet's designed to teach, that's what it's taught me, especially the Pythagorean theorem, the quadratic formula, how to factor quadratics, how to find the lengths of lines, distance formula, things like that. That's what the packet teaches. Now, in terms of my focus, it has first of all taught me much better critical thinking skills, because rather than just solving algebraic equations, I have to really think about the problems that I'm shown. I have to say, okay, they're asking me how far apart they were in the desert, what equation do I use to solve that, how do I solve it, how do I set up the equation, and it's really logic-based. It also help me make my ideas much more accessible to others. So, as you can see here, originally, my work looked like this in the packet. So when I go to present it to my classmates, I'd say, okay, here's some work that I did. As you can see, it's scribbly. You can't always tell what the answers are. The lines aren't drawn with a ruler. It's not neat. It's kind of a mess. And so, first of all, this was harmful to me because when we get notebook checks, Ms. Hickey would say, okay, this problem's wrong. And I'd say, how did I get that answer? What is this problem? What am I doing? And I'd have no clue how to revise it and I'd have to start all over from scratch because I hadn't shown my work. It was also terrible to go up to the board, say to my peers, okay guys, here are the answers. Those are the answers. And it didn't really help anybody understand it. It didn't even help me understand it. I just got answers and didn't show my work. Now, more recently, my work has looked like this. My handwriting isn't perfect, typical of me, but it's legible this time. Ms. Hickey gave me a smiley face. So, I mean, the lines are drawn with rulers. I've shown out every step. Ms. Hickey had been talking to me about making sure that everyone could understand what I did and showing my work. So I actually wrote out why I did every step. Right there. So it's much, much easier to understand this than to understand this mess. So that's a really important skill. There we go. That's a really important skill to have throughout life because, especially for me who wants to go into science, I can't just say, yeah, all right, guys, here's some results. Well, how'd you get those results? I don't know, just kind of look through the telescope. Really, communicating with people is a key skill. Whatever profession you go into, it's really, really important. That also helped. It's related to my ILP goal because, group work. And rather than saying, okay, this is how I did it, making sure that the way I do it is the way that everyone else can use and the way that I can use when I look back on it. It also helped with my procrastination problem because it was never set how many problems we get through in any given day. So I'd have to stay a page ahead of the last problem we'd done in class. So I never procrastinated because it's a terrible feeling to be called on to go present a problem and have to say, I didn't do that. Sorry, everybody, because group humiliation is much worse than a teacher yelling at you and giving you a bad grade on your homework. So, the next project I'll be presenting is my symphonic analysis project from music. Open. And what we did in this project was we used sound energy analysis, which is a way to relatively objectively represent music. And so the symphonies we graphed were Haydn's 88th, Mozart's 40th, Beethoven's 3rd, and if you were an honors student, which I was, Beethoven's 5th. And so sound energy analysis uses a variety of criteria to figure out how much energy music has of any given piece. And so we actually judge sections of the piece rather than the piece as a whole, because that makes the graph look a lot more like the piece does. But so the criteria you graph it on are fast and slow, loud and soft, bright and dark, oblique and level, complex and simple, angular and smooth, wide and narrow, and dissonant and consonant. And so that's from high energy to, we can't see that, high energy to low energy. And so when you say, okay, those are very high energy sections, these are less high energy sections, and so that's what SEA does for you, because in the past, all I've been able to say about music was, yeah, that song sucks. I love that song, rather than really objectively graphing them. In addition, on this project, we had to reflect on the change from the classical period to the Romantic period. The classical period was much more, we actually used an acronym to describe it, which I do remember. It's simple, or it's sober, and it's simple, orderly, balanced, elegant, refined, and natural, right? Yes! Okay, so that's the classical period. It's very much, very, as a sober, organized, and it sounds pretty like almost like a math, like an equation, almost. And the Romantic period becomes much more emotional, much more vivid, swings, somewhat darker, there's more emotion in it, and it seems less like an equation. And so we had to use sound energy analysis to characterize this change. So from the material, I just went over some of that. I learned the difference between the Romantic and the classical periods, which I just discussed. previously I basically said, okay, everything written before 1900, that's got to be classical music. You know, anything that's a symphony, anything that has violins and cellos and basses, and that's classical music. That's not actually true. In addition, I explored the sound energy analysis process much more in depth. On the previous project, I hadn't gone into it as much, and this helped me understand it much better. Now, connecting back to my focus, I did not procrastinate on this project. In fact, I turned it in quite a bit early so Mr. Frankhouse could grade it and give me comments and I could revise it in order to show it to you all at my presentation of learning today. So, not procrastinating at all. Proud of that. In addition, it shows that I can keep an open mind, because previously I'd never studied music theory. I had just, my experience with music, as I said, had been listening to it and saying, yeah, I love this song. At my old private school, we had a music curriculum where we sat around and sang. So this really is an entirely new skill for me, and this piece shows that I can learn new things and still have an open mind, which is very important, especially in the science world, where new things are constantly being discovered, Newtonian dynamics are being challenged, the classical physics is always, you're always saying, well, wait, we're discovering new stars every day, does that actually work? And so you can't just say, la la la, classical physics, I don't want to hear you, I only care about quantum mechanics. You really have to keep an open mind with these things, and that's one of those skills that this project helped teach me. Now, the third project I'll be presenting to you is my apartheid short story, which I completed in global studies. Now, I had a copy, but my printer didn't do it right, so I will show it to you. It is a 12-page short story. I'm quite proud of it. So, for this project, we had to take on the perspective of somebody living in South Africa during apartheid and write about their experiences. And we couldn't just say, there's a guy who lived under apartheid and it was bad. We had to use terms from the unit, facts from the unit, dates from the unit, numbers from the unit, to really show that we knew this stuff. We knew what happened, and we knew what went on. And so from this material, I learned a lot, because even though I studied history pretty avidly in my spare time, South Africa just wasn't one of those things that I had focused on. I learned a lot about World War II, World War I, ancient history, Vietnam, Korea, but South African apartheid had just fallen outside of my focus, and so I really did learn a lot from this project, more so than other pieces in history, because I had at least looked at them in the past. And so apartheid lasted from 1948 to 1994. Under it, life was very hard for people who weren't in charge. And actually, my study of current events in history has made me a pretty cynical person, and so it gave me a little ray of hope to know that eventually the world said to South Africa that they would stop buying South African products until apartheid was ended. So it'll feel good for myself. Now, back to my focus, I did not procrastinate on this project. I did not write my 12-page short story the night before it was due, or the night before that, or the night before that. I started it the night I was assigned it, and I kept on working on it until, actually I finished it several days before it was due, so that I could just keep looking back over it and catching my minor errors, where I'd write of instead of if, things like that. Now, I also didn't over-underachieve on this project. Part of that is because I really enjoyed it. With projects I really enjoy, I tend to go above and beyond, really above and beyond, because I just enjoy them. And other projects I enjoy less, and I don't do as much work on, which is something I actually am thinking about focusing on in the future, even if I don't like the project, giving it my all. Now also, creative writing in general is very useful later on in life. Creative writing, not necessarily a skill you need, useful skill to have, it's fun to do, it's a skill. Now, in addition, I wrote this paper this short story, from the white perspective, the perspective of a white person living in South Africa who was pro-apartheid. And so, for somebody like me who's interested in arguing about politics and religion, even when the other person is so clearly wrong, and it seems blatantly obvious, they must have a reason for thinking that. And figuring out what that reason is really helpful. I mean, so if I have time, I will read you an excerpt from the story, but I timed it last night, it ran a little long, so I want to make sure that I can get through everything. But if we have time, I will read you an excerpt. But so, seeing both sides of an argument, important not only like me who loves arguing, but important in everything. You know, whatever you do, you can't just say, I don't want to hear what you have to say. I'm right and you're wrong. There can't be, no, there's no middle ground. I'm right, I'm right. And so, even though the people supporting apartheid in South Africa, it's very obvious to us and to most of the world that actually at that point, that they were in the wrong. They were doing the wrong thing. It's important to be able to see everything from their point of view so that you can help change their point of view and convince them why they're wrong. And actually at the end, he does see a bunch of children get murdered and he does say, okay, apartheid's bad. So I'd like to wrap it up by talking about my future. For high school, next year, I think in terms of ILP goals, one of my main ones is going to be don't procrastinate, because even though I've been getting better at it this year, I still do it. And I really need to nip that in the bud before I get to junior year and senior year, and especially to college. Now, overachieving, again, don't do it. Now, I think that's more quantifiable because I can say, I'm not going to get B's on projects. I'm not going to say, okay, I turned it in and it's a B and that's all right. I'm also, even in the event that I do work that is a little bit, below what I want it to be and it is a B, I'm going to revise it. Excuse me. Because one of the problems I had this year was I'd say, I get a project back, it's a B, it's a C. I look at my average and I say, wait, my average is still an A. I don't need to do anything. And that's a terrible habit because, again, like I touched on earlier, at the beginning of the presentation, that's just caring about grades rather than the learning and the skills that you get out of the project. And the learning and the skills are the most important part. The grades are pretty important, but learning and the skills are more important. In addition, I was thinking about, I was going to try to take all 6 classes for honors. I've managed 5 this semester. There's really no reason I shouldn't take 6 in the fall. In addition, this is less of an ILP thing, but just something that I want to focus on throughout the rest of high school, throughout the rest of my educational career, to work with teachers to make sure I learn as much as I can, rather than just saying, got an A, don't need it. I don't want to be one of those kids who gets 100 on the test and then says, all right, brain, forget everything, start studying for the next test. Because that's really useless, and that's not what school's supposed to be like. In terms of my future in college, all my goals can connect pretty relevantly, I'm not sure if that's a word, but they can connect pretty clearly to it the same way they can here. Not procrastinating, very important, because if I get into MIT, which is where I want to get into, I can't start a 20-page paper the night before it's due, and then hand it in and say, okay, I have 5 pages, because that really wouldn't work. Now also, college is a much more competitive environment, so I can't just be all right with getting 90s, getting 85s, and saying, no, that's okay, because in college, it's competitive. There are other kids who really want to get into that class of 1,000 that gets into MIT freshman year, and if my papers are all 90s and everyone else's are 105s, it seems pretty clear who's going to get in. And so, making sure that I can keep the best possible grades while getting the most out of it is really important for me. Especially because I'm not in a position where I can afford to pay for MIT myself. So I really need to make sure that I can say, you should give me a scholarship, and here's why. Also keeping an open mind. In college, there's a lot of new learning. There's a lot of, whoa, I have never heard of that thing ever before in my life. What is that? And so it's crucial to be able to keep thinking about things, keep an open mind, and as I mentioned earlier from the South Africa project, to be able to see things from both perspectives. So that's the main connections. Also sharing my work, making sure that other people can understand it. If I hand in something to a professor and he says, are you writing in Arabic? I can't do that. I mean, that's not useful, that's not helpful, that's something that'll give me an F. So those are how all my skills connect. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?